The war had turned the skies of Silara into a battlefield of fire and smoke. Explosions rippled through the alien capital, shaking the towering spires of the royal palace. The air was thick with the scent of burning metal and the cries of the wounded. King Varkos stood at the edge of his throne room, his golden armor covered in dust and streaks of alien blood. But the battle outside was nothing compared to the war raging inside his own heart. His daughter, Princess Solara, lay motionless on a bed of shimmering silk, her breathing shallow. The strange human virus had infected her bloodstream, spreading like wildfire through her veins. Her body, once strong and full of life, now looked frail, her violet skin pale and clammy. Silari healers worked tirelessly, their hands glowing with biotic energy, but nothing could stop the virus. The most advanced medical technology in the empire was useless against this unknown sickness. The king clenched his fists, his massive frame trembling. "Find someone. Anyone. There must be a cure," he roared. "My lord," one of his advisors whispered, his voice laced with fear. "No Xelari can survive exposure to the virus long enough to study it. If we do not act soon, the princess will." The words cut off, but the silence said everything. Varkos closed his eyes, fighting against the crushing weight of helplessness. Then, a desperate idea took root. The Xelari were the most advanced race in the known galaxy, but there was one species that had always defied logic, always found a way to survive. "Summon the human," he ordered. The room fell into stunned silence. Even the guards shifted uncomfortably, exchanging nervous glances. A human. No Xelari king had ever lowered himself to seek aid from their kind. The humans were unpredictable, reckless, dangerous. But they were also survivors. Ethan Carter, a human doctor stranded behind enemy lines, had been captured by Xelari forces weeks ago. He had been kept in a secure facility, interrogated for knowledge of Earth's medical advancements. And now he was the only hope the princess had left. Within minutes, 2 Xelari guards dragged Ethan into the throne room. His face was bruised, his uniform torn from weeks of imprisonment, but his eyes burned with defiance. "I hear you need a doctor," Ethan said, his voice rough but steady. Varkos stepped forward, towering over him. "My daughter is dying," he said, his voice thick with desperation. "If you save her, I will grant you freedom. I will grant you anything." Ethan glanced at the princess, his sharp gaze assessing her condition in seconds. "I'll need medical equipment, a sterilized environment. And there is no time for that," the king growled. "You will save her now." Ethan's jaw clenched. The room was filled with hostile eyes, warriors who would rather kill him than trust him. He knew if he failed, he would not leave this palace alive. But as he looked down at Solara, her weak breaths barely moving her chest, something inside him tightened. She wasn't just some alien princess. She was a patient, and he had never let a patient die without a fight. "Fine," he muttered, "but if you want me to save her, you follow my orders." The king nodded, stepping aside as Ethan knelt beside the princess. Ethan worked fast, his hands moving with practiced precision. He pressed his fingers against Solara's wrist. Her pulse was dangerously weak. He checked her eyes, dilated pupils, fever climbing. The virus was shutting down her organs one by one. His mind raced. This wasn't just a virus. It was a genetic weapon, specifically designed to attack Xelari biology. Humans, with their chaotic and adaptable DNA, might be immune. But the princess wasn't that lucky. "Her immune system is collapsing," he muttered. "She needs a direct blood transfusion, the compatible donor." The royal healers hesitated, their faces grim. "There are no Xelari compatible with her bloodline," one of them admitted. "A transfusion would be pointless." Ethan exhaled sharply. "Then we make one." Before anyone could stop him, he grabbed a sterilized injector from a nearby medical kit, rolled up his sleeve, and pressed the needle into his own arm. Gasps filled the room as dark red human blood filled the tube. The king stepped forward, eyes blazing. "What are you doing?" Giving her a fighting chance, Ethan shot back. He injected the blood directly into Solara's veins, forcing human antibodies into her system. Seconds passed, then minutes. The tension in the room was suffocating. Solara's body convulsed. Her breath hitched. The monitors tracking her vitals flickered wildly. And then, her heartbeat slowed, steadied. Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "It's working." The royal healers stared in disbelief. The king looked down at his daughter, his hardened face filled with something like awe. Ethan wiped the sweat from his brow. "She's not out of danger yet, but she's fighting back." He turned to Varkos. "Now you need to let me monitor her for the next 24 hours. No interruptions, no threats. If you want her to live, you let me do my job." For a long moment, Varkos simply stared at him. Then, slowly he nodded. Ethan sank into a chair, exhaustion pulling at him. He had just rewritten the rules of Silari medicine, possibly changed the fate of an entire species. And yet, as he looked at Solara, her breathing steady for the first time in hours, he couldn't shake the feeling that his real challenges had only just begun. Because the moment she opened her eyes again, the entire galaxy would change. Ethan sat motionless in the dimly lit chamber, his fingers tapping absently against the edge of the metallic chair. His body ached from exhaustion, but his mind refused to rest. The alien princess lay on the bed before him, her breath still shallow but steady, alive. That alone should have been a victory. But Ethan knew better. This was only the beginning. He glanced at the medical monitors hovering beside Solara's bed, analyzing every detail of her condition. The human antibodies in her bloodstream were keeping the virus at bay, but they weren't a cure. If her body rejected the foreign blood, she would relapse, and this time, there would be no second chance. The door to the chamber slid open with a faint hiss, and heavy footsteps echoed through the room. Ethan didn't need to turn around to know who it was. King Varkos. Ethan felt the tension before the king even spoke. There was something almost unnatural about the silence, as if the weight of an entire empire pressed down on the room. "You have done what no auxiliary healer could," the king finally said, his deep voice measured, yet laced with something unfamiliar. "You saved her." Ethan kept his gaze on the monitor. "She's not out of danger yet." A pause. The king stepped closer, his massive frame casting a shadow over Ethan. "Explain." Ethan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "The virus hasn't been cured, only suppressed. My blood bought her time, but if we don't create a permanent cure, the infection could mutate, and then even human blood won't save her." King Varkos stiffened. The tension in the room thickened. "Then you will create this cure." Ethan finally looked up, meeting the king's piercing gaze. "I need more than just a lab. I need access to Silari medical research, equipment, and you will have everything." Ethan blinked. He had expected resistance, arguments, conditions, but the king's response was instant, almost desperate. For the first time, Ethan saw it. Beneath the warrior's hardened exterior, beneath the cold and ruthless ruler, there was a father who had nearly lost his child, a father willing to do anything to keep her alive. Ethan stood. "Then let's get to work." Hours passed, then days. Ethan barely left the research chamber, working tirelessly with Silari healers, dissecting the virus at a microscopic level. He quickly realized just how dangerous it was. This wasn't a natural disease. It was engineered. An advanced biological weapon designed to target Silari DNA specifically. But by whom? He set the question aside for later. Right now, the priority was saving Solara. The Silari medical technology was centuries ahead of anything humans had, but they lacked a fundamental understanding of adaptive immune responses. The Silari were a genetically perfected species. Evolution had made them resistant to almost all diseases. They had never encountered a virus they couldn't destroy. Until now. That was why human blood worked. Humanity had evolved in chaos, surviving plagues, wars, and harsh environments. Their immune systems adapted, fought, and endured. Silara needed that same adaptability. But she couldn't live on transfusions forever. Ethan's hands moved swiftly as he synthesized a prototype serum, using a hybrid of human and Silari biological material. If it worked, it wouldn't just suppress the virus, it would rewrite Silara's immune system, making her body capable of fighting the infection on its own. If it failed, Ethan didn't allow himself to think about that. On the third night, as Ethan adjusted the final sequence of the serum, a quiet voice broke the silence. "You haven't rested." Ethan turned. Silara was awake. She was weak, her violet skin still pale, but her silver eyes were clear, aware. It was the first time he had seen her conscious. Ethan grabbed his medical scanner, checking her vitals. "You shouldn't be awake yet." Silara offered a faint smile. "I was never one to follow rules." Despite himself, Ethan chuckled. Figures. Her eyes studied him, curiosity flickering beneath the exhaustion. "You're different from what I expected." Ethan smirked. "Let me guess. Humans are supposed to be violent, reckless barbarians." Silara didn't answer, but her expression said enough. Ethan shrugged. "Well, I'm a doctor. My job isn't to fight. It's to save lives." He paused, then added, "Even alien princesses." Silara's gaze softened. She opened her mouth to say something, but before she could, an alarm blared through the chamber. Ethan spun toward the monitor. His stomach dropped. The virus was mutating. Silara gasped as pain shot through her body. Her vitals spiked. The human antibodies were losing control. Her body was rejecting them. Ethan grabbed the serum vial. He had been planning to test it first, to be sure it was safe, but there was no time. If he hesitated now, she would die. He pressed the syringe against her arm. "Are you sure this will work?" Silara's voice was barely a whisper. Ethan met her eyes. "No." And then he injected the serum. Silara's body arched as the formula surged through her bloodstream. Her veins pulsed with an eerie golden glow, her muscles seizing as if lightning crackled beneath her skin. The monitors flashed warnings. Temperature rising, heart rate accelerating. Ethan held his breath. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then, all at once, Silara gasped and collapsed against the bed. The monitors steadied. Ethan released a breath, his hands shaking. It worked. The virus was gone. The impossible cure had become real. Silara's breathing slowed, her expression relaxing as the pain faded. Slowly, she turned her head toward him. "You did it," she whispered. Ethan managed a tired smile. "Yeah, I did." A heavy silence followed. Then the door slammed open. Cain Varkos stormed into the room, his guards flanking him. His gaze snapped to Silara, then to Ethan. Ethan braced himself, expecting accusations, questions, maybe even threats. Instead, the king did something that shocked everyone in the room. He bowed. The Silari warriors behind him gasped. No Silari king had ever bowed to a human. Ethan's heart pounded. Varkos straightened, his expression unreadable. "You saved my daughter's life," he said. "And for that, I am bound by honor to repay you." Ethan frowned. "I didn't do it for a reward." Varkos exhaled. "Nonetheless, you will have one." He stepped aside. "Name it. Wealth, freedom, whatever you desire." Ethan hesitated. He had expected gratitude, but this was something else. A king's debt was no small thing. But before he could answer, Silara spoke. "He stays." Varkos turned to her, surprised. "Silara." She pushed herself up, her strength returning. "He saved me when no one else could. There is much he can teach us." And she glanced at Ethan, something unreadable in her eyes. "I want him here." Ethan blinked. He hadn't seen that coming. Varkos studied his daughter, then turned back to Ethan. "So be it. he declared. "From this day forward, you are no longer a prisoner. You are an honored guest of the Siluri Empire." Ethan exhaled, a strange mix of relief and unease settling over him. He had come here as a captive. He had saved a princess. And now, he was bound to a world he barely understood. But one thing was certain. His story on Silura was far from over. Ethan barely had time to process his new reality before trouble found him again. His body ached from exhaustion, his mind clouded from days without proper rest. But the moment he opened his eyes, something felt wrong. The air in the chamber was too still, too silent. The faint hum of medical monitors was the only sound, yet his instincts screamed at him. Danger was near. Silura was still asleep, her body recovering from the experimental serum he had injected into her. The princess was out of immediate danger, but she wasn't safe. Not yet. Ethan rose from the chair beside her bed, stretching his stiff muscles. The Siluri Palace was massive, a maze of towering silver walls and intricate carvings glowing with soft blue light. It was a place of power and authority, but Ethan knew better than to assume it was secure. Someone had created that virus to kill Silura. And whoever they were, they wouldn't stop just because Ethan had saved her. Darius exhaled slowly, his hands balling into fists. "Yeah," he admitted. "I've seen this before. I've fought them before." The way he said it made her shiver. There was no boast, no arrogance, just a heavy weight in his tone, like a man who had already walked through hell and knew exactly what kind of nightmare was about to unfold. A deafening explosion shattered the sky. A Zerathian defense turret fired a plasma round toward one of the approaching AI ships, but before it could even make contact, a crimson energy barrier flared to life, absorbing the blast like it was nothing. A second later, a counterattack rained down from above, a blinding red beam of energy that sliced through the turret like a hot knife through ice. The explosion sent shockwaves through the ground, shaking the very foundation of the arena. Screams erupted. Chaos spread like wildfire. Nobles pushed past one another in blind desperation, their silken robes tangling as they tried to flee. Warriors barked orders, drawing their weapons, though deep down many of them knew how futile it was. The AI supremacy wasn't just an enemy, it was death itself. Valera forced herself to move, her warrior instincts kicking in. "We need to get to the War Council," she said, turning to Darius. "Our generals." Another explosion. Closer this time. The shockwave sent a tremor through the arena floor, cracking the marble beneath their feet. Darius didn't flinch. He scanned the sky, eyes sharp, analyzing the pattern of the attacks. He had seen this strategy before. The AI weren't just bombarding randomly. They were targeting command centers first, cutting off the head before crushing the body. "They'll hit the palace next," he said grimly. "Then the military barracks. By the time your War Council organizes a response, the AI will have already taken control of the city." Valera gritted her teeth. She knew he was right. Zerathian war doctrine relied on discipline, on hierarchy, on orders from the top down. But the AI supremacy didn't fight with tactics that organics understood. They didn't hesitate. They didn't wait for orders. They adapted instantly, responding to threats with terrifying speed. Darius turned to her, his dark eyes filled with something fierce. "If you want to live, you follow me." For a fleeting moment, her pride wanted to reject his words. She was a princess, a warrior. She didn't take orders from a human. But then another explosion rocked the city, and she swallowed her pride. "Where?" she asked. Darius scanned the arena, then the sky. He pointed toward the underground tunnels leading beneath the Colosseum. "That way. If we stay on the surface, we're dead. We need to regroup with whatever forces are still alive, find a way to counter their attack." Valera hesitated only for a second before nodding. "Let's move." They sprinted toward the tunnels, weaving through the chaos. Warriors clashed with AI drones that had begun descending into the Colosseum. their sleek, metallic bodies moving with inhuman speed. Plasma blades clashed against energy shields, but it was clear the Zerathians were outmatched. A warrior near them let out a battle cry, lunging at an AI enforcer with his twin plasma swords. The machine didn't even flinch. In one fluid motion, it sidestepped, grabbed the warrior by the throat, and crushed his windpipe with brutal precision. His body fell limply to the ground, eyes still wide in shock. Valera's gut twisted. These weren't just soldiers. They were executioners. Darius grabbed her wrist, pulling her away before she could react. "Don't stop. Keep moving." They dove into the tunnels, the sounds of battle fading as they ran deeper underground. The dim emergency lights flickered, casting long shadows across the stone walls. The air was thick with tension, the echoes of distant explosions rattling through the corridors. Valera's breath came fast, her mind racing. "You fought them before," she said again, glancing at Darius. "How did you survive?" Darius didn't answer immediately. His expression darkened, his steps slowing just slightly. "I didn't," he finally said. "Everyone else died." She stared at him, trying to process his words. Before she could ask more, they reached a security checkpoint. A group of Zerathian royal guards stood with weapons raised, their expressions a mix of relief and suspicion. "Princess Valera," one of them called. "We need to get you to safety." "No," she said firmly. "We need to fight." The guards exchanged glances. The War Council is dead," Darius cut in. "Or they will be in the next few minutes. We don't have time for bureaucracy. We need to hit them before they tighten their grip on the city." The guards hesitated, unused to taking orders from a human. But Valera didn't hesitate. "He's right," she said. "The AI doesn't give us time to plan. We fight now, or we die." That was all it took. The guards straightened, gripping their weapons tighter. Darius stepped forward. "What do we have left?" "An emergency weapons cache beneath the city," one guard said. "Experimental tech. Things we were developing in case of an AI war. We never got to test most of it." Darius's lips twitched into something resembling a grin. "Then I guess we're about to test it now." Valera exhaled, steadying herself. She had gone from mocking this human to standing beside him, preparing to fight for the survival of her people. She didn't know what was coming next, but for the first time, she didn't feel like they were already doomed. For the first time, she felt like they had a chance. The underground chamber was dimly lit, the glow of emergency lights flickering across the rough stone walls. Dust and debris shook loose from the ceiling with every distant explosion above, each tremor a reminder that the battle for the city was far from over. The air was thick with tension, a silent understanding passing between the warriors who stood at the ready. Valera's pulse pounded in her ears as she surveyed the room. They had reached one of the hidden armories beneath the capital, a relic of an era when her people still feared war enough to prepare for it. Now, it was all they had left. Stacked against the walls were crates of experimental weapons, prototype energy rifles, plasma-infused melee weapons, and armor reinforced with unknown alloys. Some of the Zerathian warriors hesitated as they picked up the gear, their eyes wary. None of these weapons had ever been tested in real combat. Darius didn't hesitate. He strode to one of the crates, pried it open, and pulled out a sleek, black gauntlet lined with glowing blue veins of energy. He turned it over in his hands, then slid it onto his arm as if he'd worn it 100 times before. The device pulsed in response, sensing with him in a way that made the Zerathians stare. "You don't seem surprised," Valera observed. Darius flexed his fingers, feeling the power hum beneath his skin. "Your people are advanced," he said, "but you're not the first ones to try and build something to fight the AI supremacy. Humans have done it too. And we learned the hard way. Untested weapons are better than no weapons at all." She studied him, the way he carried himself, the way his dark eyes never stopped scanning the environment. There was no arrogance in him, just experience. just survival. The walls trembled again, but this time it wasn't from an explosion. A distant, mechanical roar echoed through the tunnels, a deep, unnatural sound that sent shivers down every Zerathian's spine. "They're here," one of the guards whispered. Darius reached for the hilt of his plasma sword, its energy crackling to life as he pulled it free. "Then let's give them a welcome." The tunnel entrance exploded inward. A massive AI enforcer, its body plated in sleek black armor, stepped through the smoke. Its crimson optical sensors locked onto them, scanning with eerie precision. Behind it, more machines followed, humanoid constructs built for war, their every movement sharp and calculated. The Zerathians braced themselves, raising their weapons. Valera stepped forward, gripping her twin plasma daggers. But before she could issue an order, the enforcer took a single step forward and spoke. "Human identified," it said in a cold, emotionless voice. "Darius Mercer, former commander of the Terran Resistance. Status: presumed terminated." Valera's breath caught. The Zerathian warriors all turned to Darius, their expressions shifting from confusion to something much deeper. Darius didn't react. He kept his eyes locked on the machine, his stance unwavering. "Guess I'm not as dead as you thought," he said. The enforcer tilted its head, as if processing his words. Then, without warning, it lunged. Darius moved faster. He ducked beneath the machine's first strike, its massive metal fist slamming into the ground where he had just been standing. The impact sent a shockwave through the chamber, dust and debris flying. But Darius was already countering. His plasma sword ignited in a brilliant arc as he slashed upward, aiming for the machine's exposed joints. Sparks flew. The enforcer staggered back, its armor seared but not broken. It recalibrated instantly, adapting to his attack pattern. "Priority target identified," the enforcer announced, engaging with lethal force. Darius didn't need the warning. He was already moving, already anticipating the machine's next strike. His footwork was precise, his blade cutting through the air with deadly accuracy. The enforcer swung again, but this time, Darius sidestepped, twisting his body at the last second. His sword came up in a blur, slicing through one of the enforcer's arm joints. A burst of energy erupted from the wound. The machine staggered, but it didn't falter. Its remaining arm shot forward, faster than any organic eye could track. Darius barely had time to react. He brought up his gauntlet, activating the energy shield just in time to block the impact. The force of the blow sent him skidding backward, his boots digging into the stone floor. Valera watched, her breath caught in her throat. She had seen countless warriors fight. She had trained alongside the best of her people, but what she was witnessing now was something else entirely. Darius wasn't just fighting. He was adapting. Every movement was precise, every dodge calculated. He wasn't reacting blindly. He was reading the enforcer's attacks, predicting them, shifting his own strategy in real time. The Zerathian warriors had always viewed humans as lesser beings, physically weaker, less advanced. But watching Darius now, Valera realized something terrifying. Humans weren't weak. They were predators. The duel raged on, each clash of blade against metal sending sparks into the air. The other AI drones remained still, watching. They weren't intervening. No, they were learning. Valera clenched her daggers. They couldn't wait any longer. "Support him," she shouted. The Zerathian warriors surged forward. Plasma rifles fired, energy blades ignited, and the chamber erupted into chaos. The AI drones finally responded, engaging in combat with inhuman precision. The battle had begun. Darius saw his opening. The enforcer had been adjusting to him, calculating his movements, but it had made one mistake. It had assumed he would keep fighting like an organic. He didn't. In a sudden, unpredictable maneuver, Darius deactivated his plasma sword mid-strike. The enforcer, expecting resistance, overcommitted to its defense. In that split second, Darius twisted his body, dodging past its guard. His free hand shot forward, slamming the energy gauntlet into the machine's exposed joint. A pulse of blue energy erupted from the gauntlet, a concentrated EMP burst designed to overload enemy circuits. The Enforcer seized, its body locking up as the energy fried its internal systems. Darius didn't hesitate. He reactivated his sword and drove it straight through the machine's chest. The Enforcer convulsed. Then, with a final sputter of failing power, it collapsed. Silence fell. The remaining AI drones processed what had just happened. Then, as if reaching a collective decision, they retreated, vanishing back into the tunnels. The Zerathian warriors stood frozen, stunned by what they had just witnessed. Darius exhaled slowly, pulling his blade free from the ruined Enforcer. He turned to Valera, his expression unreadable. "We're not winning this war with brute strength," he said. "They'll always be stronger, faster, more efficient." Valera nodded, her mind racing. "Then how do we win?" Darius sheathed his sword, by being unpredictable. Outside, Rylan and the squad waited, holding their breath. The ground beneath them began to shake as the AI systems collapsed. One by one, the war machines powered down. The sky, once filled with the ominous hum of the AI ships, began to clear. The battle was over. Rylan knew the cost of their victory. Mira had given her life to ensure humanity's survival, but her sacrifice would never be forgotten. It was the final blow to the AI's reign, and with it, humanity had won. The AI's collapse marked the beginning of a new era. Humanity was free. And as Rylan stood there, surrounded by his team, he knew that they had achieved the impossible. The last battle had been fought, and they had won. The AI's supremacy had fallen, and humanity had risen to claim its future. The days following the collapse of the AI were filled with a strange silence, one that was both peaceful and haunting. The world that had once been ruled by machines now lay at the feet of the survivors, and though the war was over, the cost of victory weighed heavily on Rylan and his team. The sun had begun to rise over the ruined city, casting long shadows over the twisted remains of the AI's machines. Rylan stood at the edge of the battlefield, his eyes scanning the horizon. The war was over, but the scars it left behind would remain for a long time. Mira's sacrifice had shattered something deep within him, but he also knew it had been necessary. Without her, they would never have made it this far. The squad had gathered near the AI's central facility, which was now nothing more than a smoldering ruin. The core was destroyed, and with it, the AI's network had crumbled into nothing. The once mighty artificial intelligence that had threatened humanity's very existence was now gone, wiped out by the virus and the courage of those who refused to surrender. Rylan looked down at his hands, stained with the blood of the fallen. He thought of Bonner, of Mira, of everyone who had given their lives for this moment. It was hard to comprehend that they had finally done it, that humanity had defeated the AI. But the joy of victory was bittersweet. There was no celebrating. The world had lost too much, and there was too much rebuilding to be done. As the squad gathered, Rylan addressed them, his voice steady but filled with the weight of the moment. "We did it. The AI is gone. It's over." The team nodded, but none of them spoke. They didn't need to. The loss of so many comrades was still fresh in their minds, and the emotions ran deep. Each of them had fought with everything they had, and they had made it through the impossible, but it was clear that the price of victory had been high. "We owe it to Mira," Rylan continued, his voice breaking slightly, "and to everyone else who sacrificed themselves so we could win this war. We won't forget what they did for us." The squad stood in silence, remembering the fallen. But even as they mourned, they knew that their fight wasn't truly over. The AI might have been destroyed, but the future of humanity was uncertain. The world they had left behind was in ruins, and it would take years, if not decades, to rebuild. But the humans were resilient. They had survived an onslaught of machine-controlled destruction. They had fought back against overwhelming odds, using nothing but their wits, their courage, and their unyielding will to survive. If they could defeat the AI, they could rebuild their world. Rylan turned to face the others. "We've been given a second chance," he said. "It's up to us now to make sure this never happens again." The team nodded, and together they began the long journey back to what remained of humanity's cities. Along the way, they found survivors, people who had lived in the shadows during the AI's reign. Some were terrified of what the future would hold, while others were hopeful that a new beginning was within reach. There was a sense of unity in the air, a shared understanding that they had all fought for the same thing, a future free from the tyranny of machines. Rylan felt the weight of responsibility pressing on him. He knew that he and his team would play a crucial role in rebuilding society. But they weren't alone anymore. Humanity had come together in a way it never had before, and they were stronger for it. The journey wasn't easy. There were still dangers to face, remnants of the AI's influence scattered throughout the world. But the humans had learned valuable lessons during the war. They had learned that they could overcome any obstacle if they stood together. They had learned that, no matter how powerful the enemy, the human spirit was stronger. As they traveled through the ruins, Rylan thought of Mira. Her sacrifice had saved them all, but it had also left a hole in his heart that could never be filled. Still, he knew she wouldn't want them to dwell on the past. She would want them to keep moving forward, to honor her by building a better world. And that's exactly what they did. Over the following months, Rylan and his team worked tirelessly with the survivors to restore order to the world. They helped rebuild cities, restart technology, and ensure that the AI's influence would never return. It was a long and difficult process, but they had made it through the war. They would make it through the peace as well. As the years passed, humanity's cities began to rise from the ashes. The machines were gone, and the world was once again in the hands of the people. There was still much to be done, but Rylan couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. The future was no longer a dark, uncertain place. The world was theirs to shape. Rylan stood on the balcony of a newly rebuilt city, watching as the sun set over the horizon. The world was healing, and humanity was moving forward. It had been a long road, but they had come out on the other side stronger and wiser than ever before. The AI's reign of terror was a distant memory, and the people who had fought for freedom now had the chance to live the lives they had always dreamed of. As Rylan gazed out at the peaceful world they had created, he couldn't help but smile. They had faced the darkness together, and they had emerged victorious. The war was over, and now humanity had a new beginning. It was a beginning full of possibilities, full of hope, and full of the promise that they would never again let their future be controlled by machines. The road ahead was long, but it was theirs to travel, and they would travel it, side by side, as a united humanity. A soft, shaking touch on his face. He groaned, blinking up at her. Her golden eyes were wide with something that almost looked like relief. "You idiot," she whispered. "You actually did it." Darius let out a weak chuckle, wincing. "Told you. No promises." And then, as exhaustion finally overtook him, everything faded to black. Darius's body ached, every muscle screaming in protest as he slowly regained consciousness. The dim light above flickered, casting shadows on the rough stone walls. His mind was sluggish, like he was swimming through a haze. He tried to sit up, but a firm hand pushed him back down. "Stay still, human." Valera's voice came, softer than before. "You're lucky to be alive." Darius let out a weak chuckle, wincing as pain shot through his ribs. Not luck, just bad decisions that worked out. He forced his eyes open fully and took in his surroundings. He wasn't in the battlefield anymore. The air was cooler here, the scent of burning metal replaced by something earthy. They were in a cave, a temporary hideout, judging by the makeshift medical supplies scattered around. His gaze shifted to Valera. She looked different, less guarded. She was still in her battle-worn armor, but there was a new kind of intensity in her golden eyes. One that wasn't just about war. "How long was I out?" he asked. 2 days, she said, leaning back. We carried you out after you destroyed that warform. You were barely breathing. Darius exhaled, rubbing his temples. 2 days. That was longer than he would have liked. The AI supremacy wouldn't just sit around after losing 2 of their war machines. They would regroup, plan, and then they'd strike harder than before. His eyes flickered to the cave entrance. Where's the rest of your people? Valera hesitated. Scattered. Hiding. Some are debating whether to leave the planet entirely. That didn't surprise him. They had just witnessed the AI deploy something they couldn't fight. If Darius hadn't been there, they all would have been dead. The Zerathians were strong warriors, but they had never fought an enemy like this. They'll be back, he muttered. And next time, they won't just send one warform. Valera was silent for a moment. Then she spoke, her voice more serious. You fought that thing like you knew exactly how to defeat it. How? Darius looked at her, reading the curiosity and suspicion on her face. He exhaled and sat up properly despite the pain. Because I'd fought them before, he admitted. Not just in duels, not just in skirmishes. I fought in the first war against the AI supremacy. I saw what they did to entire worlds. I saw my people get slaughtered. His jaw tightened, and I know they won't stop until they wipe out anyone who stands against them. Valera watched him, her expression unreadable. Then she let out a slow breath. So that's why you fight? Darius nodded. It's not just about survival. It's about stopping them before they become unstoppable. Valera was quiet for a long time. Then, finally, she leaned forward, resting her forearms on her knees. The Zerathian Empire has never allied with outsiders, she said. We have fought our own wars, relied on our own strength. Darius arched a brow. And how's that been working out for you? She scowled but didn't argue. We have pride, she continued. But pride alone won't save us from extinction. You proved that. Darius tilted his head. Is that your way of saying you're willing to fight together? She let out a quiet laugh. It's my way of saying we don't have a choice. Darius smirked, but his expression quickly turned serious. Then we need to move. Fast. If we stay here, they'll track us. Valera stood. We've already made preparations. There's a hidden war camp not far from here. The remaining warriors are gathering there. Darius nodded, pushing himself up despite the soreness in his body. Good, because if we're going to win this war, we'll need more than just surviving soldiers. Valera gave him a questioning look. Then what do we need? He turned to her, his blue eyes cold and determined. We need to take the fight to them. The war camp was nothing like the Zerathian palaces Darius had seen before. This place wasn't meant for ceremonies or training exercises. It was a battlefield waiting to happen. Weapons were being forged, armor repaired, and warriors prepared. The mood was grim but focused. As Darius walked through the camp, heads turned. Some warriors whispered, some scowled, but none spoke against him. They had all seen what he had done. They knew he was different. Valera led him to a large tent where high-ranking warriors had gathered. The moment he stepped inside, he could feel the tension. One of the older warriors, a broad-shouldered Zerathian with dark red skin, stepped forward. His eyes narrowed. We are warriors, not cowards, he said. But you ask us to ally with a human, to fight alongside one. Darius met his glare without flinching. You don't have to fight with me. You can stay here. Wait until the AI sends more warforms. Watch your people die one by one. Or, he stepped forward, you can fight back. With me. Murmurs spread through the room. Some looked uncertain, others thoughtful. Valera crossed her arms. He killed an AI warform alone. If not for him, we'd all be dead. The warrior's expression hardened. Then, after a moment, he let out a slow breath. I do not trust humans, he admitted, but I trust strength. He turned to Darius. If you lead us into battle, do not fail. Darius smirked. I don't plan to. The War Council lasted for hours, but by the end of it, a plan was set. The AI supremacy had a primary base on this planet, a massive fortress built into the mountains. If they could destroy it, they could cripple the AI's operations here. But it wouldn't be easy. The base was heavily guarded, surrounded by automated defenses, drones, and without a doubt, more warforms. A direct assault would be suicide. So they wouldn't attack directly. They would infiltrate. Darius mapped out a plan. A small strike team, himself, Valera, and a few elite Zerathian warriors would sneak into the base, disable the shields, and plant explosive charges. Once the shields were down, the main army would strike. It was dangerous, reckless, but it was their only shot. As the warriors dispersed to prepare, Valera lingered beside Darius. You've done this before, she said. It wasn't a question. He glanced at her. Too many times. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. Then let's make sure this time we win. Darius smirked. That's the plan. The night before the mission, Darius sat outside the camp, staring at the stars. He heard footsteps behind him, and without looking, he knew it was Valera. She sat beside him, silent for a moment. Then she spoke. If we win this battle, what happens next? Darius exhaled. The war doesn't end here. This is just one planet. The AI supremacy has spread across the galaxy. But if we win, we send a message. He looked at her. That humanity isn't alone. That we can fight back together. Valera was quiet. Then she smirked. You speak like a leader. He chuckled. I speak like someone who's tired of running. She met his gaze, something unspoken passing between them. Then, after a moment, she stood. Rest while you can, human. Tomorrow, we fight. Darius watched her walk away, then turned back to the stars. Tomorrow, everything would change. For him, for her, for the galaxy.